So in a previous video, I introduced the idea of a circulatory system, or the need for a circulatory system. And at least in humans, the three major components of that circulatory system, or of that transport system. And the one that we focused on previously was the fluid medium itself, or the blood. Now, in this video, we're going to take a look at another one of those components, and that one is the actual transport vessels themselves. So let's start off with me asking you to measure your heart rate. Now, for most people, that would be, well, I'm going to measure my pulse. I'm going to put my fingers here, I'm going to put them to my wrist. But nowadays, you could probably just check your wrist, and if you have a smartwatch or some sort of activity tracker, you might be able to figure out your heart rate there. But what is it that you're actually feeling? What is it that you're actually measuring there? I mean, which one of these blood vessels are we interacting with when we take our pulse? Now, most people, when they hear blood vessels, will associate that almost right away with veins. And certainly veins are one of the transport vessels that we have, or the blood vessels that we have in the body. And if you asked further or probed further, you might be able to get the word artery, or you maybe would even be able to get them to say capillary. Wait a minute, I know you may be saying, isn't it capillary? But isn't it potato? So let's start off with the blood vessel that you are interacting with when you're taking your pulse, and those are the arteries. Now, arteries, by definition, carry blood away from the heart. And one of the biggest misconceptions about arteries is that they carry oxygenated blood. And that's true if we're talking about something called the systemic circuit. So the systemic circuit is where blood is transported from the heart to the rest of the body. And in that circuit, it is true that the arterial blood is going to be oxygenated. But there is another circuit from the heart where the blood is being transported to and from the lungs, and in that circuit, arterial blood is actually deoxygenated. Now, we'll talk about these circuits a little bit more, and the pathway of blood a little bit more when we talk about the heart, but it's important to know that we define arteries as those blood vessels that carry blood away from the heart, not those blood vessels that carry oxygenated blood. So if we take a look at the arteries themselves, they're fairly thick-walled, at least in terms of a blood vessel, because they have fairly high-pressure blood moving through them. And as a result, they're elastic. They can expand to accommodate this additional pressure, especially when the heart first contracts or beats or pumps. It moves blood through at a fairly high pressure. And this expansion of the blood vessel due to that high pressure is what we feel when we feel the pulse. Now, if we were measuring our blood pressure, that first contraction of the heart, where the blood pressure is its highest, is what we call the systolic pressure. And when the heart relaxes and the blood moving through the arteries is at its lowest pressure, that's what we refer to as the diastolic pressure. And again, we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get to the heart. But it is, again, in summary for our arteries, important to know that it is the expansion and contraction of those arteries that allow us to feel the pulse, and it is the arteries, or the job of the arteries, or at least the definition of the arteries, to move blood away from the heart to the rest of the body. And remember, it's not just oxygenated blood, it depends on the circuit. So now, with all that said, we are going to focus on the oxygenated blood, or the systemic circuit, and follow the arteries. Some of them can be fairly large, by the way. We can think about them as a highway that's transporting this blood to different areas of the body. They're going to start to branch off into smaller highways and smaller roadways. And these smaller ones that still carry the blood away from the heart is something that we call an arteriole. Now, the arteriole and their diameter can be controlled a little bit by the nervous system in terms of thermoregulation. They can either dilate or become bigger and allow more blood flow through, or they can constrict and allow less blood flow through. And if we think about what happens when we get really warm, say when we're exercising and our body needs to thermoregulate by lowering our temperature, our arterioles are going to expand or dilate, and that blood is going to rush to some areas that come in contact with the outside or external environment to help cool the blood. And that's why in our face or our hands or the other areas of our body, when we're exercising, they can start to look flushed or have a lot of blood to them, because we have that dilation of the arterioles, or the blood vessels, near the surface. Conversely, we can go through something called vasoconstriction, where those blood vessels are going to constrict or become smaller, and as a result, the blood flow to the external areas when our body's very cold is going to be significantly less, to retain the heat and again thermoregulate the body by retaining the heat in and near the core. So as we move from the arterioles, we're going to go to the site now of internal respiration. That is where gas exchange takes place within the body itself, away from the pulmonary system or from the lungs. And that's when we get now into these capillaries. And the capillary network is extremely small, and some of these diameter, these capillaries, are only large enough for a single blood cell to flow through. And as a result, it slows down the pace of the blood. You might think, well, with these really small diameters, shouldn't the pressure be really big? And if it was just one tube, the answer would be absolutely yes. But these arteries and arterioles branch into a massive network of capillaries, and as a result, we have a fairly slow movement and a fairly slow flow rate of the blood through these capillary networks. Now, when we take a look at the individual capillaries, what we're going to be seeing here is that these blood vessels have slowed down significantly, and that's a benefit to us because now it allows time for oxygen to diffuse out into the surrounding cells. No cell is more than 1 or 2 cells away from a capillary network usually, and it allows carbon dioxide to diffuse out. So this is the site of the internal respiration where oxygen is diffusing into the cells that need them, and then carbon dioxide waste is diffusing back into the blood. So we've taken a look at the pathway of blood from the heart, through the arteries and through the arterioles, and at least in the systemic circuit, this blood is oxygenated. It moves into the capillaries or the capillary network, and their internal respiration takes place in which oxygen diffuses into the body tissues and carbon dioxide is removed. And now we're going to move into the final side of this circuit, which is where we take, in the systemic circuit anyway, deoxygenated blood back to the heart through venules and veins. So the first blood vessel that sort of takes the blood away from the capillary network are these smaller veins or venules. It then moves into the larger veins. Now these veins don't have the same characteristics as arteries. They are thinner walled. They generally accommodate less pressure blood or lower pressure blood, and they are a little less elastic or a little more rigid than the arteries are. The other thing that they rely on a little bit more than the arteries do are the surrounding musculature. So the surrounding muscles and the movement of those muscles actually helps accommodate the movement of blood back to the heart. And this is especially important when you think about the fact that we have blood down in our toes and it's got to get all the way back up to the heart. So if you've heard the saying, get the blood moving or get the blood flowing, it's a real thing. You've got to stand up and move and walk around so that the musculature surrounding those veins can help pump it back up towards the heart. So another structural component of the veins that make them unique, at least in terms of blood vessels, are these valves. And so the valves help prevent the backflow of blood. So as the blood is moving up, especially towards the heart, we start to see these valves. And these valves, when fully functional, help prevent the backflow of blood and keep the blood moving in a one-way direction back towards the heart. So you may know somebody, or you may have seen or have heard of varicose veins. Eee. They're not very appealing to look at, certainly, but they can also be very painful and sometimes require surgery to repair. Now, what varicose veins are is a pooling of blood in and around those valves, or a malfunctioning of the valves within the veins themselves. But it is those valves that are characteristic of veins and help keep blood moving in that one-way direction from the body tissues back to the heart. So now hopefully after watching this, you have a little better understanding of the structure and function of the 3 major types of blood vessels in the body: the arteries, which carry blood away from the heart; the capillaries, which are the site of the internal respiration and the exchange between the blood and the body cells; and the veins, which carry blood back toward the heart. Now, we are 2 out of 3 of the major components of the human circulatory system down. The next video we're going to take a look at is going to focus on the last one, and that is, of course, the heart, or the pump of this transport system. Thanks for watching.